On December 18, 1994, three friends were walking through a gorge in southeastern France, not looking for anything in particular, when one of them felt a faint draft of air slipping out of a crack in the cliff face, a crack barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. On the other side of that crack was a cave that hadn't felt open air, hadn't seen a single ray of light, and hadn't been entered by any person or animal in over 20,000 years. What they found inside would force scientists to rewrite the entire accepted timeline of when humans became capable of sophisticated art. This isn't speculation or a legend passed down through generations. It's one of the most rigorously studied archaeological sites of the last century, backed by more than 250 radiocarbon dates and peer-reviewed research spanning 3 decades. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what sealed this cave shut for tens of thousands of years, what was found completely undisturbed inside it, and why it single-handedly overturned a theory about human creativity that had gone almost unquestioned for 30 years. Subscribe before we go in, because almost nobody alive today has actually been allowed to see this place in person, and there's a very deliberate reason for that. Start with where this sits. The cave is located on a limestone cliff above what used to be the ancient riverbed of the Arche, within a stretch of dramatic gorges in southeastern France, a region now recognized as one of the most important prehistoric art landscapes on the planet, granted UNESCO World Heritage status in June 2014. The three people who founded Jean-Marie Chauvet, Liette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire weren't scientists. They were simply exploring the gorges as a hobby when they noticed that faint pull of air, the kind of small detail most people would walk straight past without a second thought. That thread of air led them through a hole barely wide enough for a person to fit through, and into a cave system that had sat in absolute darkness since the depths of the last ice age. Word spread through the archaeological world almost immediately once the paintings inside were confirmed as genuine. The site was later named Chauvet Cave, after one of its 3 discoverers. What puzzled researchers from the very beginning was a bigger question than simply what's inside it, was how a cave this significant had stayed completely untouched for so long, with no person, no animal, not even stray debris finding its way in across tens of thousands of years. The answer came down to a single geological event, a massive rockfall that collapsed and completely buried the cave's only entrance. Using more than 250 radiocarbon samples taken from charcoal, bone, and torch marks throughout the cave, researchers identified 2 entirely separate periods when ancient humans actually visited and used the space, one stretch running from roughly 37,000 to 33,500 years ago, and a second stretch from roughly 31,000 to 28,000 years ago. The evidence indicates an initial rockfall partially sealed sections of the cave near the end of that earlier period, and 2 further collapses sealed the entrance completely not long after the second group of visitors left. After that final collapse, nothing larger than an insect could have found a way inside, turning the cave into something close to a genuine time capsule. No rain reached the paintings, no wind wore down the pigment, no animal tracked mud across the floor or dislodged debris from the ceiling. Temperature and humidity stayed remarkably stable for millennia, protected from every surface weather change happening just a few feet away. Once researchers began properly mapping the interior, they found a cave system far larger than anyone had guessed, from outside 6 connected chambers stretching across roughly 1,300 feet of rock, holding more than 1,000 paintings, along with carvings cut directly into several walls. And the subject matter itself immediately stood out from other known Ice Age cave art. Alongside the more familiar horses, mammoths, and rhinoceroses, Chauvet's walls are covered in predators: cave lions, cave bears, hyenas, even a leopard, animals that almost never appear in cave art from this period anywhere else in the world. The floor told its own story once researchers examined it closely. Soft clay ground still held the actual paw prints of cave bears that once slept there, along with the wide, shallow depressions where those same bears curled up to rest for the night. Fossilized bones were scattered throughout bear skulls, the curved horns of an ibex, and, in one especially striking detail, a set of footprints belonging to a child. alongside what may be a wolf or dog track running beside it, sat pressed into the clay exactly where they were left more than 25,000 years ago, completely undisturbed the entire time. Here's where the discovery genuinely upended the accepted science. For decades before Chauvet, most experts believed early cave art started out crude and simple, gradually improving over thousands of years as techniques slowly developed and passed down between generations. A theory of steady, gradual progress laid out by historian Ander Leroy-Gourhan in a major 1965 book on prehistoric art, and one almost nobody in the field seriously challenged for 30 years afterward. Chauvet broke that theory apart the moment researchers examined the walls closely. These weren't simple outlines or rough scratches. The artists had deliberately scraped the stone surface clean before painting, creating a smooth, pale background that made their pigments stand out sharply. They used the natural bumps and curves of the rock itself to give animals a genuine sense of depth and muscle. In some panels, an animal was deliberately drawn with extra legs or a second head slightly offset, so that under flickering torchlight, the image would appear to shift and move, an early, deliberate form of animation. None of that fits a model of primitive early attempts. It looks like the work of artists who already carried generations of accumulated skill behind them. At a point in time, nobody previously believed that level of sophistication was even possible. Pinning down the actual age of these paintings became the critical test, and it's the part of this story with the most rigorous science behind it. Researchers used radiocarbon dating on charcoal, pulled directly from the black drawings themselves, along with torch marks and bones scattered across the cave floor. By the early 2010s, more than 80 separate radiocarbon dates had been collected from the site. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2012 confirmed the paintings were created during the Aurignacian period, roughly 30 to 32,000 years ago, corroborated in part by geological analysis of the rock slide sealing the entrance. Later research pushed the picture further. Still, some of the oldest black drawings at Chauvet have now been dated to roughly 36,000 years ago, making them among the earliest confirmed figurative art anywhere on Earth, thousands of years older than Lascaux. The French cave, long treated as the gold standard of ancient art before Chauvet's discovery. That number forced a genuine, significant rewrite of a timeline researchers had trusted for decades. If humans living roughly 36,000 years ago were already capable of shading, layering, and creating a genuine illusion of motion on a cave wall, the old model of primitive humans slowly fumbling toward basic skill needed serious reconsideration. These were people surviving through the depths of the last ice age, actively hunting genuinely dangerous animals for survival, and somehow still finding the time, resources, and mental sophistication to produce art at this level. Some researchers now believe the cave was never used as a living space at all. There's no evidence of long-term habitation, no accumulated layers of daily refuse, no worn living area around a fire pit used repeatedly over years. Instead, many researchers suspect Chauvet served some kind of ritual or spiritual function specifically, a place people traveled to deliberately in order to create these images, rather than somewhere they slept or ate regular meals. One detail makes this feel remarkably personal. A series of handprints appear scattered across different chambers throughout the cave. Some painted as solid shapes, others left as outlines where pigment was blown around a hand pressed flat against the stone. Researchers identified one specific individual, distinguishable by a slightly bent pinky finger, whose handprints appear in multiple separate locations throughout the cave, meaning it's genuinely possible to trace one specific human being's path through total darkness, more than 30,000 years later, using nothing but the physical marks their own hand left behind. Once Chauvet demonstrated that art this advanced existed this early, researchers naturally began investigating whether it was a genuinely unique, isolated site, or simply the first example anyone happened to find. Starting in 2008, members of the original research team, under researcher Julian Mani, expanded their work to other rock art sites scattered along the Arche gorges, in a wider effort known as the Chauvet Cave Art Project. One nearby site, Bomval Fontaine, and another known as Douce Ouvertures Cave, showed drawing styles strikingly similar to Chauvet's, suggesting the same group of people, or at least a closely connected regional culture, may have decorated more than one cave in the area. That work remains slow, since each new cave site requires its own careful independent dating and mapping before any meaningful comparison can be trusted, but so far, it's helped place Chauvet within a broader regional picture, suggesting Ice Age communities along the Archa were more interconnected than researchers had previously considered. Even so, nothing found nearby has come close to matching either the scale or the extraordinary preservation of Chauvet itself. Protecting that preservation became its own major undertaking the moment the discovery became public. Because researchers immediately thought back to what happened at Lascaux decades earlier. That cave, discovered in 1940, had been open to public visitors for years before scientists realized the damage being done. Body heat, human breath, and artificial lighting from thousands of visitors caused mold and a spreading green fungus to damage artwork that had survived intact for tens of thousands of years before people started walking through the front door. Lascaux was eventually closed permanently once the extent of the damage became clear. Determined not to repeat that exact mistake, French authorities sealed Chauvet from public access almost immediately after its 1994 discovery, and it has remained closed ever since. Only a small number of researchers are permitted inside each year, working under strict limits on time and equipment specifically to avoid disturbing the cave's temperature or humidity even slightly. To let the public experience the site without risking the original, a full-scale replica, called the Caverne de Pont d'Arc, was constructed nearby, carefully recreating the chambers and paintings in precise detail. The actual cave remains locked away exactly as the final rockfall left it, while millions of visitors instead walk through its faithful copy. Plenty of genuine, open questions remain. Nobody has identified exactly who these specific artists were, or what particular beliefs drove them to create these images so deep underground, so far from any natural light. In the cave's furthest chamber sits one especially striking image of figure combining the lower body of a woman with the head and front legs of a bison, positioned on a section of rock, hanging down from the ceiling like a natural pendant. Researchers still genuinely debate what it was meant to represent. Whether it reflects an early belief system, a story passed between generations, or something else modern researchers may never fully reconstruct. There's also the matter of the two distinct groups who used the cave roughly 5,000 years apart, whether the second group knew anything at all about the people who came before them, or independently discovered the exact same cave on their own, remains a genuinely open question researchers continue to investigate using improved dating techniques and three-dimensional scanning technology. None of this rests on guesswork stretched beyond what the evidence allows. Every detail here traces back to peer-reviewed radiocarbon studies, geological surveys of the collapsed entrance, and decades of careful, ongoing fieldwork carried out by research teams across multiple French institutions. What began with three friends following a faint draft of air through a crack in a cliff turned into one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the last 100 years, genuine proof that human creativity was already remarkably sophisticated tens of thousands of years earlier than anyone had assumed possible. A rockfall that could have destroyed everything inside instead preserved it in near-perfect condition, freezing one specific slice of the Ice Age in place until 1994 finally cracked it back open. If a single accidental rockfall could protect something this significant for over 20,000 years, there's a real chance the next cave researchers find along that same stretch of gorge rewrites the story all over again.